evening, everyone. We are in a special business meeting of the District of Squamish for Tuesday, January 23rd. Alton Squalum, Peace plus Squamish, Whale welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. There's an amended agenda along the already in front of council with the inclusion of the wastewater treatment plan and emergency expenditures that was presented at committee earlier today. There's a motion, a recommended motion in front of council on, and that's the amendment. For a motion to adopt the amended agenda. Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Race. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. First up, we have a public hearing. Before every public hearing, I read this statement, so just bear with me. The public hearing is convened pursuant to Part 14, Division 3 of the Local Government Act to allow the public to make representations to council respecting matters contained in the proposed bylaw, proposed District of Squamish zoning bylaw number 2200/2011, amendment bylaw secondary suites amendment 2582/2018. Everyone present shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard or to present written submissions respecting matters contained in the proposed bylaw. No one will be discouraged or prevented from making their views known. However, it is important that remarks be restricted to matters contained in the proposed bylaw. Members of council may ask questions following presentations. However, the function of council at a public hearing is to listen rather than to debate the merits of the proposed bylaw. In considering the proposed bylaw, council has received documents which may influence its decision. These documents are available for review and comment and have been included as part of the planning department report, or if received later, handed out at the meeting and included in the public hearing package. If any documents are submitted during the hearing, please feel free to review the document during the hearing by asking staff. Members of the public shall maintain order and quiet and shall not applaud or interrupt any speech or actions of the member of council or any other person addressing council. I now call the planning department to introduce bylaws.
Good evening, Mayor and Council and members of the community joining us tonight. My name is Brian Daly, Development and Subdivision Coordinator with the Community Planning Department. Tonight's public hearing is for zoning bylaw number 2200/2011, amendment bylaw number 2582/2018, secondary suite amendments. District of Squamish zoning bylaw number 2200/2011, amendment bylaw number 2566/2017 was adopted by council on December 19th, 2017. The bylaw, however, failed to follow two procedural requirements. The amendments at third reading regarding the regulation of short-term rentals was a substantial change in use and require a new public hearing, and the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure authorized the bylaw without the changes made at third reading. Clause 9 of bylaw 2582, section 41, table 3, minimum vehicle parking requirements was amended after first and second reading to correct formatting and to include multi-unit flex unit in the table for clarity. Council has directed staff to explore further options to increase the supply of rental housing. The secondary suite amendments seek to address the limited supply of ground-oriented rental housing in existing residential neighborhoods. To do this, the proposed amendments will introduce the term accessory dwelling units to differentiate between secondary suites and detached suites, including the requirements that they each have to follow, allow both an accessory dwelling unit and a secondary suite on the same lot as a single-family home, introduce a greater variety of housing forms such as multi-unit flex units to increase rental housing options. The amendments will also define short-term rental and stipulate that short-term rentals are not permitted in secondary suites, multi-unit flex units, or accessory dwelling units, and define cooking facilities to help with enforcement of unpermitted suites. No public comments were received for bylaw 2582. The comments received for bylaw 2566 prior to the public hearing on December 5th, 2017 included 3 comments in support of permitting 2 suites on the same lot. 1 comment suggested requiring accessibility if an owner is proposing a ground-oriented suite, and 1 comment was supported permitting 2 suites on the same lot but raised concern about suites being used as an Airbnb rental. Staff have implemented a consult level on the IAP2 participation spectrum for this project. Notices were sent and delivered to property owners and tenants within 100 meters of property-specific rezoning. Notice of public hearing was published in the Squamish Chief on January 11th and 18th, 2018. And the notice of the public hearing was advertised on the district website. Public hearing to begin.
Thank you. Any questions for clarification purposes from staff? Councilor Reyes?
Yeah, the notice that was given to, go back to that notice
Sure.
slide. Delivered to property owners and tenants within 100 meters of property-specific rezoning. But this is not a specific property rezoning.
It is. We amended the use in the CD40 zone, 1500 Highway 99, waterfront landing, to permit multi-unit flex units as a use
Oh, okay.
in
And
that.
this applies to that particular development?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilor Spell?
Can you explain a little bit more about the ground floor dwellings? So this doesn't preclude flood construction level, or does it?
No, flood construction level must be met in any application for one of these building permits.
Yeah.
But should you be out of a flood construction level, you could have a grant-oriented rental suite.
And- Right, and parking conveniences?
There was no parking relaxations. One parking stall is required for a secondary suite, multi-unit flex unit, and nothing was changed in that.
Not two.
To
Or
relax
a
it, sorry.
garage and a parking space was that removed? So now it's one?
The parking requirements are two for a single unit dwelling, one additional parking space for a secondary suite, or an additional space for an accessory dwelling unit as well. So say you had a secondary suite and an accessory dwelling unit on a property, you would require 4 parking stalls total.
I had with our
Which
students,
is our
we required
current
two.
Yeah.
regulations, that hasn't changed.
Just to have one accessory suite, we were required two, so if that's a change, then
That's not,
There is no change to that.
that's been like that for a while. Any other questions for clarification purposes? I now invite the public or the applicant, which is us, I guess, to come and make any comments if they'd like. I don't have a list in front of me, but if there's anyone in the public who would like to speak to this rezoning, please let me know. Come up to the podium and state your name, your street address, and if you represent yourself, a business or an organization. I'll ask for a second time, is there anyone who would like to make further representations? And I'll ask for a third time, is there anyone who would like to make further representations? There being no further speakers, I don't believe council has any more questions, but if you do, let me know. Before the closing of the public hearing, I'm going to call, I've already done that. Just of note, once the public hearing is closed, council cannot receive any further communications on the rezoning prior to third reading. However, council can consider third reading further on in this agenda. Thank you. I now declare this public hearing closed. Moving on, we have bylaws. A1, District of Squamish zoning bylaw number 2200, 2011 amendment bylaws, setbacks and cash and loop parking number 2576, 2017.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight, Elaine and I, my name is Carrie Hamilton, we're planners here at the District of Squamish. We'll be presenting the amended downtown zoning bylaws from the original proposal, which were brought forward this past December for consideration of second reading and scheduling of a public hearing. So the overall intent of the downtown zoning amendments is to align zoning regulations with downtown policy and vision. As part of the downtown zoning amendments, we proposed 3 bylaws for first and second reading on December 19, 2017. The first bylaw consisted of 2 topic areas, setbacks and cash and lieu. And the setbacks bylaw provides space for development of separated bike lanes and a vibrant streetscape while maintaining on-street parking needs. Cash and lieu relates to providing more parking regulation equity downtown and providing more options to pay for commercial parking stalls off-site to encourage development of employment space. The employment space bylaws requires a minimum amount of commercial or office space in a building to assist in securing employment space, to meet long-term demand, and foster local employment to secure more employment space downtown. The final bylaw, Cleveland Character, introduces 3 elements to the downtown C4 zone. A is to maximize frontage width to keep the existing small town feel of our primary commercial street downtown. B, to set back the upper stories above the second story in order to maintain the 2-story feel along Cleveland while opening up views and light and still allowing higher buildings behind. And C, a new density metric to the C4 zone for parcels specifically on Cleveland Avenue through a floor area ratio. We've called this FAR in some of these slides here, which provides certainty of a maximum density while allowing massing to move around on a building in consideration of views and shading. What we're proposing today, there's changes to, the December 19th council meeting gave all 3 bylaws first reading, as well as the setbacks and cash in lieu bylaw second reading. Council proposes a number of revisions for staff to review, and the red arrows indicated where these changes have been made. As you can see, a change is being proposed to the cash in lieu, which is why all 3 bylaws are being presented for second reading this evening. So having recently presented the overall information to Council in December, today staff will focus on the revised elements and can answer questions relating to all bylaw amendments afterwards. The revisions presented today relate specifically to C4 properties along Cleveland Avenue, from Pemberton Avenue to Main Street, and this is highlighted in the blue. Revisions include changes to the amount of employment space required, maximum floor area for small to large parcels, and their related cash in lieu changes. So at the December 19th, 2017 council meeting, council expressed concerns that the minimum employment space requirement was too low to meet long-term need for employment space downtown Squamish. The proposed floor area ratios were too high to maintain the small town feel of Cleveland and to keep views and reduce shade, and that there should be a connection between employment space requirements and floor area ratio as density. We also heard that more parking reductions to incentivize employment space should be considered. So as a result, staff have proposed the following amendments. A, the new proposal integrates the employment space requirements and floor area ratios of Cleveland Avenue using a density bonus scheme. B, the FAR and employment space numbers are provided for comparison on the right here. And C, the new proposal starts with slightly lower FARs for each lot size, as well as higher employment space requirements to start. D, it then uses a density bonus scheme with a 0.25 FAR increase for the provision of 30% employment space and a 1.0 FAR increase for the provision of 100% employment space. So since the December meeting, we have updated the FAR concept images with the corresponding increased employment space numbers to give you a visual idea of what this could look like. So to refresh on FAR, technically speaking, FAR is the amount of gross floor area of a building divided by the area of the lot. It is a measure of density and a density metric. Important to note, there are exclusions from FAR. Parking and common areas such as building hallways, stairways, and mechanical rooms are not included in the gross floor area calculations, so they are excluded from FAR. In the images, gray is parking, blue is employment space, and orange is residential. You may notice that the gray spaces are minimal for all the lot sizes with 100% commercial, and we'll explain that in just a few more slides. But an important thing to note on this slide is that although there is an increase of 0.1 FAR, the massing looks similar in both the 25%, the 30%, and the 100% options.
Can you just go back to that one for a second? Just for clarity, the 20% requirement for employment space is included in this analysis here?
This is specifically for Cleveland, so the 20%, and we'll get to this in further slides. Yeah, but this is for Cleveland, so there will no longer be a 20% in the Cleveland options. This is what this proposal is saying. So the image, this image shows a mock-up of proposed FAR. It also shows the proposed upper story setbacks presented in December, on the December presentation. Kind of gives you a visual of what Cleveland could look like. So the intent of this amendment is to assist in securing employment space to meet long-term demand and foster local employment in alignment with the employment land strategy, as you can see here in red. So 0.4 was the target, and in the original proposal, we were meeting this target for all small lots on Cleveland Avenue. So you can see that here. The new proposed percentages-based approach, highlighted in green here, will allow for design flexibility while helping to achieve this goal in almost every scenario. So this employment space amendment bylaw has always aimed to increase the supply of employment space and promote downtown Squamish as the core of our community in line with the vision for downtown. To determine what percentage of employment space should be applied for all C4 zone properties, so not just the Cleveland aspect, we reviewed the amount of space included in recent downtown developments to determine what was feasible. We landed on the 20% requirement, which was the original proposal, and still is the proposal in front of you this evening, as this is close to the percent amount seen in developments that have proposed second-story employment space. Now, if we go back to the employment land strategy and downtown neighborhood plan targets of that 0.45 FAR, the strategy supply-demand projections assume that developments would follow the use and building types specified in the downtown neighborhood plan. But recent downtown developments are not following this plan, and with significantly less commercial space being built. The 20% amount attempts to create a space requirement that is more in line with the downtown neighborhood plan and this employment space, and the employment land strategy. So recent commercial space gap analysis completed by our economic development department found that the supply of commercial space in Squamish will be insufficient under both medium and high growth scenarios. So even with the proposed 20% amount factored in, so considering this, staff recommended that the employment space bylaw and specifically the 20% amount be reviewed regularly, but also have included a 100% commercial option for Cleveland specifically to incentivize even more employment space. I'll pass it over to Elaine to provide a few examples to give you some context.
And just to further clarify Carrie's last slide, the 20% is outside of Cleveland, and tonight we're proposing minimum 25%, 30 and 100% on Cleveland. So to provide the public and the district with a better understanding of floor area ratio as a metric, as a density metric, we are going to provide examples of floor area ratio from projects in Squamish and Vancouver. Vancouver uses the term floor space ratio, but for all intents and purposes, it is very similar to FAR. So for massing purposes, the examples provided tonight generally, so these specific buildings generally do not reflect the proposed required percentage of employment space that we're proposing, but these buildings provide a picture of a building roughly built to the proposed FAR. So we're trying to get a sense of building size here, especially with the 100% employment space scenarios. The example buildings mostly do not actually have 100% employment space. And then in regards to parking, these example projects in Vancouver have underground parking, and parking is exempt from FAR calculations. And we're showing them tonight because these are examples of the 100% employment space scenario, and in Squamish, we are proposing the option to pay for most of those stalls in lieu. So it's a very similar situation where the parking is not being taken into account for
In
the
Squamish or on Cleveland?
on Cleveland.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll run through the proposed FAR numbers as they relate to lot size. And you'll note that some of the FAR examples are higher than the FAR being proposed, but it's within the ballpark. So we presented this image at the top in December. This is starting with the small lot size, less than 6,000 square feet. We're proposing with 25% employment space, an FAR of 2. This is an image of a building proposed with an FAR 2.1. In the small lot size, 30% employment space, FAR 2.25. There's no example provided here. And then for the 100% employment space scenario, so the biggest FAR of 3, this is an infill project proposed in Vancouver, and that has an FSR of 3. So that's that image at the bottom.
Hey, one clarification piece,
Yeah.
when you say 30%, I just want to, this is clear for everyone. It's 30% of the FAR, or is it 30% of the building?
It's 30% of the gross floor area. So gross floor area is how we calculate,
So it's not 30%, I just want to make it
Yeah.
clear, it's not 30% of the FSR, it's 30% of the entire
Yeah.
building envelope. So it's less, it would be less percentage of the FSR.
say that again.
I just want to make sure it's clear for everyone that the percentages we're talking about is based on the whole building footprint,
Further to Carrie's comment, so
not on the FSR. I just want to make sure we're clear what the percentage is being based on.
the so FAR is a calculation based on GFA, which is gross floor area, and our definition of gross floor area exempts parking, common areas like hallways and stairways. So those elements wouldn't be taken into account in the FAR. But all the usable spaces, it would be 30%
Of
of
the
that.
usable spaces, that's a good way of putting it,
Yeah.
not of the actual building size. I
Yes.
just wanted to make sure people understood. that.
Yeah, an important consideration is that the parking is exempted in both of those calculations. So when we're talking about these density metrics, we're not talking about the parking, and that's very specific to, or unique for Squamish because we don't have underground parking. So it's something very important when we talk about the massing of the building.
So further with the small lot size at the 3.0 FAR 100% employment space, this is a building from Vancouver, and this has an FSR of 2.5. So that would be buildable within the 3.0 FAR scenario. So here we're moving on to the medium lot size between 6,000 square feet and 20,000 square feet. No examples provided for the smallest FAR, but for the FAR of 2, the 30% employment space in Squamish, so Cleveland Courtyard has an FAR of 2.09. It's slightly above what's being proposed at 2. And to note with Cleveland Courtyard, there is actually an internal empty space. That's why it's called Cleveland Courtyard. And so with the concurrent setback requirements, the actual building would be set back, the massing. And then Cleveland Gardens, this one is being built right now, so that's got a higher FAR than what is being proposed. That's FAR 2.2, and we're proposing an FAR of 2.0 with that 30% employment space. So the new proposed FAR numbers that relate to employment space should incentivize the provision of more employment space while slightly reducing density and building massing on Cleveland to help maintain the existing commercial character. However, as you can see in these images, for 100% employment space developments, the density and height will likely be comparable to recent C4 developments. But as I said with the last slide, note that all developments will be required to set back the upper floors, which is being proposed in the setback bylaw. So here are some examples on that medium lot size, the highest FAR with the 100% employment space. This is another one also in Vancouver. And just note that when staff was researching buildings to provide us examples, staff found more examples of the larger size buildings than the smaller size, which is why maybe it looks like there's more bigger buildings in this presentation. So this is also in Vancouver. This has an FSR of 3, and it's so it's a little bit bigger than what would be buildable on the medium lot size at 2.75. More examples of that same scenario. So the medium lot size, 2.75 FAR, and 100% employment space. And these two examples have slightly higher FARs than what would be buildable. Moving on to the larger lot size, so starting off with the smallest FAR of 1.5 with 25% commercial space. This is the Teardrop property. This is what that FAR is. But note that this lot size is quite a bit bigger than most of the ones that are on Cleveland. For that middle 30% employment space with the large lot size, no example provided, but then that large lot, if we were to imagine that the main which is being built was 100% employment space, then that's the sort of size of building that could be achieved on a large lot.
So, as we mentioned earlier, you may notice that the gray spaces are minimal for all lot sizes with 100% commercial, and that is because we are also proposing that developments proposing 100% employment space will be eligible for 100% cash in lieu. I know Elaine alluded to that earlier in the presentation. So the exception to this would be that the development would still have to meet their accessibility stall requirements. So the rationale behind this is that parking is an added cost to development, and Squamish is in a unique circumstance with the underground parking not being a viable option. So with Cleveland Avenue as our high street, reducing commercial parking requirements will increase viable ground floor commercial space and increase commercial density, but without increasing the building massing from the other viable development options. So we're not trying to increase massing with this, but also allowing more developable space, usable space.
Can I ask a question on that?
Mm-hmm.
I see how that might make sense for the really small one, but if parking isn't equated in your FAR, I realize there's a cost. Why wouldn't we figure out a way to require some parking, even in a 100% employment building?
We do have, there are only a few lots on that Cleveland stretch that are large lots. We had originally proposed not to have that, but we see this as an opportunity, from what we heard from first reading, that council wanted to see more options for more commercial space along Cleveland Avenue, and to see potentially a density bonus approach. And this was a viable option that we saw would be an incentive to a developer to actually take up this option. If we were to propose anything with 100% commercial, but without enough incentives, they might not take this option. It's basically an option that's on as a zoning bylaw, but not put into practice.
Okay, so they could do 100% cash in.
So we tried to find a middle ground where this isn't increasing massing, but it also provides an incentive for developer. And we have an example, I guess, of this already in Squamish. This Cornerstone building currently provides 11 parking stalls, and under the proposed bylaw change that we're proposing tonight, they would also have to have 3 accessibility spaces required.
What do they have now?
They don't have, I don't believe they have accessibility stalls. I believe they're parking, they had a variance for their parking regulation.
They did, but they have a parking lot underneath.
Yes, and they have accessibility stalls up front. On street,
street.
They're on street, yeah. But that's something that we have heard with this development as a complaint, that there's not enough stalls, especially because it is a doctor's office and there's a lot of health clinics there, that was something, so we wanted to ensure that we kept that in this regulation, so that you can have 100%, but you still have to provide your accessibility stall requirement. So that avoids that in the future. So happy to take more questions, but just to finalize this presentation, our recommendation is that council give second reading to amendment bylaw 2576, 2577, and 2578, and that public hearing be scheduled for February 13, 2018.
Council, do you have any questions? Councillor Carr?
Yeah, thanks. And I'm sure you've let the BIA know and the Chamber of Commerce know, and I'm sure you have, because the only place I see any kind of pushback may be BIA, not the only, but. Okay.
Susan?
Does this restrict, was 4 floors, it went from 6 to 4 floors, is that correct? Or all the examples, is it only the examples that you gave?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. If you could repeat it, Carrie?
Yeah.
Yeah, and all the examples were 4 floors, I'm wondering if we've moved from 6 to 4 floors instead of the step-back examples that were given?
So is there currently, is there a height restriction? Or could these be 5-story buildings with the same FAR, for example?
So through you, Mayor, what we're proposing for Cleveland specifically is different from what we're proposing for the rest of the C4 zones. So for Cleveland specifically, we're looking at a different density metric. We would be proposing FAR as this density metric, which would allow for flexibility, and in most of these examples can provide a 4-story. As you can see in some of the small lots, could provide a 3-story. This hasn't changed, other than the original proposal that we had was the middle column. So that was what we proposed, and then now we've proposed 2 other options as well. So one that's a lower FAR and one that's a higher FAR.
But
all
could technically, if the 6-story building, as long as the FAR is the same, they could put a 6-story building?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, that answers the question. Can I just follow up
Yep.
with one more question? I really like that you've included an entire employment. My concern is that we're not gonna get, we're probably not gonna get employment. And then the lack of second floor, I've seen some proposals that the 20% is only ground floor retail. So if the only way to increase that is by increasing that number to 30% in that small section of like ensuring that we have employment on Cleveland Avenue, and that's the one area where we increase our percentage of employment space, and then allow for higher density surrounding Cleveland Avenue, I would prefer to see that as opposed to allowing residential density everywhere and saying, okay, you only have to build ground floor retail space.
Through you, Mayor, we have increased the the employment space requirement for Cleveland specifically. The original proposal was 20%, and we took into consideration the interest of council wanting to see 2nd-story commercial. And through these examples, you can see that now in most of these scenarios, there are 2nd-story opportunities for commercial, so that it would, these requirements, an increase of 25% and 30%, would force a development in some way to build 2nd-story commercial to meet those requirements.
Would it be possible to go up an extra floor if they added 2nd floor office space? So density bonus for 2nd floor employment? So they can build an extra floor residential for 2nd floor office space?
Or we wouldn't do it in stories, we'd do it in FAR.
Yeah, in FAR.
I think where we've tried to find a balance is the concerns as well that we've heard from council and the community around reducing the massing along Cleveland. So we did want to be conscious of that and still provide viable options that increase the employment space, but also keep the massing at a little smaller to save our views and the shadowing on our high street.
Council, any questions? Councilor Kent?
I am a little concerned about, for commercial, the lack of parking. Especially for a wholly commercial space to have no parking available does concern me, especially on the high street, as you say, because of our recent parking issues. It's a little problematic for me.
I wonder if you could, with maybe the large 100% commercial, maybe give an idea of what the parking requirement would be if we didn't say just payment in lieu, and then we can figure out exactly what payment might look like in terms of growing our parking reserve. Would that help a little bit?
I might miss that last option that you presented, but I do know that our current regulation on Cleveland Avenue allows for 100% buyout of commercial currently, and the cash and lieu changes that we've proposed are changing that and trying to find equality amongst Cleveland and the other streets. In terms of the concerns around full commercial or full parking, yeah, I hear, like, I can hear those concerns. Sorry, maybe could you repeat
So
your
let's say, for
solution?
example, the bottom right-hand corner.
Yeah,
Pick a size of building, how many parking stalls would be paid? I think the revenue that is generated might help council understand the value proposition or be able to evaluate the value proposition.
I
So for
don't-
example, if that building at the bottom requires 100 stalls because it is X amount of commercial, it's 100 times $16,000, correct?
I don't think we have those calculations for council today.
What's the GFA on that site? What's the site area on that site developed?
The bottom one?
Yeah.
Would be more than 20,000 square feet.
So it's 21,000 square feet
21,000 square feet.
times 2.5 divided by the ratio for retail. Of course, now you're going meters into square feet. So I mean, we
Here's
can
where
likely
the
get
math
that.
graph
We
comes.
can. So it would be, let's see,
20,000 square feet would require how much parking of commercial?
It's 52,000 square feet plus or minus. Do the conversion to meters and divide by the retail parking ratio.
Yeah, in the middle of
Not-
purchase meters in my head.
It's not complex.
We could maybe, there's two of us here, we could
You
go
know
do
what,
that.
Gary's
and then-
sitting there, he
Yeah.
can do the math.
Maybe he can do it.
You've got a calculator right
Can I
there.
just follow up?
Yeah, go ahead.
If, just as a for instance or a hypothesis, another cornerstone building, but without any parking. That's what I'm saying. You have another cornerstone building, would have no parking.
And I could help ballpark that. I think they had about a 42 some odd stall wave. And they have 11 stalls, so let's say 50 times 16,000. So it'd be $1,800,000. So I did really bad math there.
And just, oh, sorry.
Jeff, go ahead.
No, my recollection is that the normal requirement for that building would have been 53 stalls. And the mayor's right, we weighed 42 and they produced 11.
We still get complaints now about people parking on the street and inability to park in that neighborhood, so I'm just saying if a new layout like this is proposed, no parking, put even more load on the street, so.
Yeah. The only other thing is, I think it was $4,000 a stall, not $16,000 a stall. So there's quite a bit of a difference.
Point's not moved, but.
Thank you, Councillor Pryor.
Yeah. It's kind of late in the day to be talking about contemplating changing that, because that bylaw there is, I worry more about the ones on Winnipeg Street and not enough parking, but parking's not what we're talking about.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that there are, again, only a few lots on that section of Cleveland, and the 100% commercial buyout is only going to be for this section of Cleveland from Pemberton to Maine. It won't be for the rest of downtown. So potentially, say, if we do have a few developers who are interested in taking this option, the rest of the downtown could take the load, and that could definitely be looked at in our parking strategy that we're moving forward with.
Why are we doing Pemberton, Maine and not Pemberton to Victoria? Like, most of that block is our park anyway. There's only one, maybe two potential development. I'm just curious.
So
We can change anything at any time. Go ahead.
would you like me to answer that question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So we did, We did want to include them to the Main Street because of the Cornerstone development is already built here. Sorry, I'm trying to get the arrow. And then we have a parcel here as well. Then there is a large parcel, a number of parcels actually here, that we also wanted to include as part of this high street because of the location and proximity to our park. And for this, the Cleveland character regulations are about trying to preserve views, shading, and pay a little bit more attention to that public realm. And the proximity of these parcels to our park were important to include. And I believe that that also, is related to our downtown neighborhood plan and the areas that were highlighted in our downtown neighborhood plan.
Councillor Blackman.
Oh, I was just gonna point out for the math, 53 times 16,000 is 848,000. So yeah, it was pretty close. So what are the parking requirements in the rest of downtown? So we're not proposing changes to those other than the higher cash and lieu variation. Is that right?
So the change in the regulations as part of this bylaw amendment for the setbacks and cash and lieu section also includes, it's the same for the downtown neighborhood plan, so it's 1 stall per residential unit, and that stays the same. The commercial cash and lieu has always been 4 stalls. You can get cash and lieu up to 4 stalls. As part of this amendment, we have changed that to also allow for an additional stalls to be included as long as you provide one commercial stall on site. So you can, we'd have a slide from our previous presentation to show that, but it's a table that's also attached in your attachment 1. If you can look at that, and it shows that there is, we are allowing a few more cash and lieu options only for commercial and only on a 1-to-1 ratio. So you'd still have to provide 1 stall on site. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Any more? Councillor Elliott.
I was wondering why we didn't apply that same theory to the 100% commercial. So the more you provide, the more you can do cash in. That's how that table works. And why that wasn't a viable option.
So through you, Mayor, we did propose that. That was an option that we proposed throughout in the first reading. So it was for all of the downtown cash and lieu area. So Cleveland would have also replied to that. But we had heard that we should consider further options, and that we also, providing the whole 100% commercial is, we needed to provide an incentive in order for a developer to take that option up. And so having the 1-to-1 ratio wouldn't be an incentive enough to do that.
I can see that for the small lots and possibly the medium-sized lots, the large lots. I'm thinking about having spaces for car share, having spaces for electric vehicles, like just a minimum of some options, plus the accessibility spots. So that incentivizes different types of car use. Without pushing it all onto other properties or parking lots. So that was my only concern, is that by eliminating it, we're also not encouraging other certain things. So yeah, so it's mostly the large lots. I know there's not that many on Cleveland, but I'm just trying to figure out if there's a balance to be had there at disincentivizing.
And I'm wondering if the Cornerstones is almost like a bit of a, that's 20%-ish, and they payment in lieu for 80% instead of 100%. So there's some facility to create some of the opportunities that Councillor Elliott's talking about. Is it 100 does it have to be 100, could it be 80 and achieve some of those goals, so. Councillor Chappelle, Councillor Buckingham.
I, in general, have never liked the C4 zoning. I really like some of the amendments that you're bringing forward. The whole idea of maintaining a view corridor in your economic, in this very small center of the economic, when we're working to build an entire oceanfront walkway down there where you can walk a block and have immense views everywhere, I'd be more inclined to have incentives like adding density, still offering parking incentives, adding density, but increasing the amount of employment, the amount of employment space, and guaranteeing that you have second floor office space, because right now you don't have to, and that's exactly what we'll get, is no employment space and people building condos, because that's what the market demands right now. So unless we actually adjust our zoning to reflect that we want employment space, and since it's only a few blocks, I would be inclined to just adjust the zoning and take residential, either add density, like go up, still cap it at 6 floors. I think anything more than, I think 6 floors is reasonable in that area, as long as you're building the capacity for people to be in the area to serve those businesses. So 2 floors of employment space, and you can have 4 floors of, and they still are stepped back for views like you showed, but allow a little bit of flexibility for land to be developed with density and employment space. And I think this goes way further than, like having the option for the 100% and the 35%, but the 25% in the smaller lots. I just wonder how that's going to actually encourage Cleveland Avenue to be a vibrant employment district and have professionals working alongside of retail businesses, because it can't just all be about retail. And there's also something in the policy that was 25-foot minimum, like minimizing the employment spaces, and I didn't like that at all. Our entire problem with building employment space was you had no place to expand into. So restricting and forcing developers to put in small employment space that are only X number wide, so that you ensure mom and pop.
Right?
It was to ensure mom and pop spaces go in there, in the policy.
Mayor Heinzman, through you, are you referring to the frontages?
Yes.
Okay, so the frontages is more of a form and character thing. It's just the front of the building, and it doesn't actually relate to the spaces inside.
Just the front, so where you go, like the entrance where you go in? But
Yeah,
then they
so
can be
instead of
expensive behind
having
that?
like a big, long, empty facade, we've got more interesting storefronts. So if you had a 50-foot lot, you'd have to break it into 2 25-foot frontages to meet the development permit area guidelines for that.
So you couldn't take the whole frontage for your business?
You could, it would just have to
You'd
look.
have to buy
a
two
lit-
separate spaces?
No, it would
and
just
make
have to
them-
look it would have to look different. It's a more of a facade treatment. Sorry.
I don't understand that. How is that valuable? I don't understand how that's valuable for employment. Or small businesses that actually want to grow and have large spaces. We have tons of
ahead, Carrie.
places.
So through you, Mayor, I'd like to maybe address some of the comments that came out. I think the important piece here is to acknowledge is that this is a stepping stone. This is something that we are increasing our employment space much more than it is currently, and we can always come back, and council can always ask staff to come and review and revise this. But we do feel it is important, as we are experiencing a lot of development applications, to move this forward so that we can at least start asking for more employment space. And believe the other point has availed me, so I will maybe speak to it a bit, sorry, or if.
Go ahead, Jason's next.
So I think it's important to sort of separate two things, and sort of the way that I look at this, because we're talking specifically about Cleveland Avenue between Pemberton and Main Street for the moment. To me, my understanding of the high street is actually a commercial shopping district, and it is actually more retail oriented. And the way that I understood from the last conversation that we had about this was that we did have some concerns that, you know, based on the current zoning and all of that, that either no redevelopment would occur, or we would get a bunch of redevelopment that would change the character of the area very significantly. And so what I see in terms of the parking relaxation requirements for this 4-block stretch is more about making sure that we're not getting a wall of 6-story buildings all across, because people have to put all of their parking on site. But Councillor Elliott did raise kind of an interesting point, and I think the mayor did as well. Number one, I actually would be comfortable with just making this go to Victoria Street. I feel like the site that is near our park, I think that site, because it's bordered by a park and because it offers unobstructed views towards the chief, could handle a higher building there. So I'm less concerned about relaxation there. And given that it's right on the same block as the Cornerstone, I think that might be too much relaxation for one area. And then also, even for some of the other big sites, I mean, maybe we don't need to do a 100%. Maybe it should just be restricted to the smaller sites, and then that way, you know, maybe a developer is interested in breaking up their site into 2, and then they have that fine grain, and then they can take advantage of the parking waivers in a different way. So,
Can I get some clarification on what you said? Were you talking south of Victoria, just not having the parking waived, or just completely different rules? Like not the FAR, Cleveland FAR, or are you just talking about not allowing for the parking?
I think mostly the parking, although I mean the other rules as well. I think it's less of a sensitive site in terms of a lot of other things, but I don't think we need to reopen that whole conversation. I don't know, but I think it was more for the parking, like, because if we do have, you know, 3 or 4 buildings that cumulatively get waiving parking, then that's 150, 200 stalls. I don't know, that, I mean, that might be more challenging, but I do recognize the fact that it is true, like, none of this we will not get commercial space built if there is not some sort of thing there. But also, I also feel like we still need to differentiate between a retail high street and an employment center area. Like, I kind of feel like, from a design perspective, the higher buildings would be better off on 2nd Avenue and, you know, in the blocks adjacent, and that's where you have your office tower type thing. I mean, for me, a high street is more of a, you know, retail on the main floor, and then upstairs, you know, some really small, you know, boutique-y offices, but not like big floor plate, major tenants and things like that. So anyway, that's sort of the way that
Thanks. Councillor Park.
Thank you. To Karen's point, I liked it when she said car share, so some kind of wording in there for car share. I like that car share. You know, to Jason's point about not going all the way down, I can understand disconnecting, but staff just said that there's lots of applications coming in and they need some kind of control to move forward, and I agree with them on that. And so I don't think if somebody on some of the larger sites wanted to bring something that was contrary, they will still bring it through to council. Right? I mean, somebody might do something that's different, but it's really cool. We'll get that, right? The cool stuff will slip through. If it's contrary to what we're saying now and we're saying this, oh, that's really, really cool. So we'll see, maybe council will,
Through you, Mayor, it would have to go through a rezoning to do that. So the property would propose their cool idea, and
don't they
yes,
have to
it
go
would-
through rezonings now?
If they are a C4 zone property, and they're proposing something within this C4 regulation, then no.
If they don't have C4 zoning, they will.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's hit and miss then, but I still feel as though I'd like to take staff's advice and give them the tools that they want today by approving this. But I still want cool stuff to slip through the cracks for us to get.
So this is second reading, so what council decides today is whatever would go to the public hearing, so just want to keep us on track. Councillor Elliott, Councillor Chappelle, Councillor Rice.
I like the changes you proposed, and I think they reflect the conversation at our last meeting. I do think we need to take it down to Victoria. I think that's important, because I think the buildings south of that are trying to protect that retail high street look and feel. I think the main contemplate that in what they were doing, and I think the developer on the OPAC West site is also looking at articulating their frontage to look like the rest of Cleveland. The only piece of this that concerns me, and I'm not sure that it will actually happen in the short term, is the large lot 100% commercial. But I think there will be a huge pushback if that were the case, if we allow those large lots to waive 100% of that parking. And so I feel like that either needs to be negotiated per project, or we need to apply similar rules as you're applying to the rest of downtown. But I do think we have to prioritize things like car share stalls, electric car stalls, and not waive those. So that would be, I'm happy to move this all forward except for that one piece of the parking.
Gary?
I actually did manage to get the math from even for a general manager, yeah. 52,000 square feet is about 4,800 square meters. That's 98 stalls. That's $1.5 million cash in lieu. If they go and decide to pay everything out in cash in lieu, which is probably unlikely. They're probably like Cornerstone going to put some of that in. But needless to say, we'd have a large chunk of change that could flow into our cash in lieu of parking, all the alternative. Last week we set up the alternative transportation. So if we wanted to then, it gives us, let's say, $1 million to do some parking improvements and increase the parking downtown. If we wanted to put in, initiate a car share program at some point, we've got some resources. If we wanted to put in electrical charging stations, we've got some resources, and they'd probably be in better places than stuck in a parkade behind an office building, when those commercial stalls tucked in parkades, tucked behind buildings, tend not to get as used as much as well-designed public parking. So this allows us to amass a fairly good war chest that allows us to then improve public parking. This year we've got find a location, acquire it, or think about acquiring it, and then start to think about parkade structures if they're needed. So it does start to fit into a larger strategy, and there is a case to be made for commercial parking does function better when it's collective rather than individually tucked behind buildings, tucked in parkades, tucked in little corners and 3 or 4 here or there. So, and it does move forward it offers an opportunity to get a purely commercial building downtown, which is something that we all like to see. So that's what we've tried to get to. Whether or not we have, I'll let council decide on.
I have Councillor Chappelle, Councillor Rice, Councillor Blackman.
Thank you. I'm happy to move forward with this. I totally agree with Gary's assessment of the parking, and I'm hoping that, in the future, we're not going to be able to, just bringing in this much density, we only have one in and out, without increasing our public transit and our active transportation and other ways to get around. We just can't have that volume of traffic downtown. So building up a war chest to centralize our parking, and it may not even be in the downtown. We may end up having shuttles to the downtown. There's all sorts of innovative ways that we can think about moving towards the future. I prefer to see employment, and this gets us, I totally agree that we need to move staff's recommendations forward and bring it to the public. And then if we need to adjust it because of public outcry, but this basically compromises, I'd rather see six.
We're still in questions, we're trying to.
Yeah, but like the parking is really everybody's.
We're still in questions, once we have motions on floor, we can articulate points of view like you were just doing.
Do you need it moved?
Well, I have two more peoples on the
Okay.
thing, but I hear where you're coming, but I just don't want you to get ahead of. Councillor Riss, questions?
No questions, just comments.
Councillor Blackmore.
Comments as well.
Okay, would anyone like to put, any more questions?
No.
Okay, would anyone like to put forward the cash and lieu and setbacks bylaw? We have to do these separately.
So there's a motion to rescind.
Okay, firstly, there's a motion to rescind the second reading given on December 19th. Let's do that separately. Move to rescind, moved by Councillor Carr, seconded by Councillor Schbel. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And there's the setbacks cash and lieu, move second reading and schedule a public hearing for February 13th, 6 p.m. at Municipal Hall. Moved by Councillor Reyes,
And I'll speak to it in a second.
seconded by Councillor Blackman-Wolf. Councillor Reyes.
Thank you. So, just a couple of comments. First of all, I do agree with keeping it down to Victoria Street, because we might not be as fussed about the parking down there. But one of the things I like about this is the setbacks, and the form of building that it will kind of lead us to, not just the box. And so that for me is important, on that space as well as other spaces. I hear the comments, and I have the same concerns about the parking that other councillors have expressed, particularly in the large commercial. And I'm prepared to go with this at this point, but I think it's going to be incumbent on the district, if one of these buildings comes along, to plan on spending that money concurrently with the construction of that building on some other parking spots, not just drop another 100% waived building or something close to that in the downtown area without providing for some other parking space. Taking the $1 million or whatever it is we're going to get in cash in lieu and put it to use right away to provide. I know there's active transportation components and so forth, but I think also it's going to be incumbent on us to keep some order downtown and provide some alternate or public parking down there. But I am prepared to see this go to public hearing as is.
Anyone else want to speak to this? Councillor Blackman-Wolf?
Yeah, I'm going to revise my comments. I'm actually okay with the way it's presented. Mr. Mustin has kind of. I agree that having a centralized one as opposed to a bunch of parking taken in the back tends to be better use of resources. But I also agree with Councillor Rice that we've got to do it concurrently.
Councillor Carr.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, for parking, I have been trained by staff to rely on the driverless car and ride share, people riding their bikes, people living and walking to work, to realize that we don't really have that big a problem. We might for a few years. So I'm going with it. But I wouldn't mind if it went all the way down to Vancouver Street because there's some height stuff going on down there. Anyway, that's my comment.
Well, we're not talking about the height one in this first bylaw.
Well, this does.
This is the cash and lieu one. The other bylaws.
Oh,
Yeah, we're not on that bylaw yet. Is that correct?
The cash in lieu, there are provisions in the regulation that specify, that are specific to the Cleveland section. So it does relate to this Cleveland component,
Yeah,
but not the height, yes.
Councillor, oh yeah.
So bylaw 257 and 6 is the one that we're
It's
talking
on the
about.
floor, yeah.
And that's the one that includes waiving 100% for 100% commercial.
Correct.
And 100% employment,
100% sorry.
For
except for accessible stuff.
I hear staff's point of view, but we don't have money in the coffer, and we would need to acquire that land, I think, sooner rather than later. I think there is a happy medium to be found on the large lots. I'm okay for waiving it for the small, medium-sized lots. So I'm not going to support promotions on the floor. I'm quite nervous about waiving all that parking for the large lot.
I'm gonna support this. I think Gary's point about the usefulness of parking, I think is a really important one. And I agree, we wanna make those, car share spaces, and we wanna make those, electric vehicle and all that sort of stuff for the future, but I think those things are better incorporated in a public parking facility of some kind. I do believe it should happen concurrently, and we have to figure out a way to get that revenue up front so that we don't wait for a building to be built and then take 2 years to build our own facility of some kind. Our solutions that we are getting the cash in lieu for have to be done in a strategic and concurrent way to address the condition that we're going to create through this potentially. If we get 100% employment building coming forward, it's a good problem to have. We have to address the problem, but it's a good problem to have. So, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Elliott and Councillor Kent opposed. Motion carries. So this is just going to second reading. Public hearing to come. Next up, if someone would like to move it, zoning bylaw 2577, 2017. Employment space, if you're moving that, moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Elliott. Councillor Chappelle, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, the 20%, is that still the correct number?
Yes,
Even
that's
though
for
the
all,
other
this,
two were 25, 30, and
through you, Mayor, this bylaw has not been changed for second reading here. The bylaw changes for the 25, 30, and 100%, they're in the Cleveland character bylaw.
okay.
This bylaw specifically talks to all C4 zones that are outside that specific Cleveland character area, just to clarify.
Yeah, and I'm happy to move this for public comment, but I do think that as you move off Cleveland Avenue, and I take Councillor Blackman-Wolf's comments, I totally agree with him about the character of Cleveland Avenue, that you want small shops and character second floor. But as we move off of Cleveland Avenue, we have more density, we can afford more employment space. So if you're looking at 6th-floor buildings and you're wanting to increase the density of height, you need to demand more commercial space. So I'm happy to go to public reading with 20% because I don't want to burden staff with any more numbers, but I will be looking for that number to increase to at least 30% for other buildings off of Cleveland Avenue if we're going to have higher density. So if it's going to be high density, we need some place for larger businesses to work. And I do agree that the character of Cleveland Avenue needs to be maintained for smaller businesses. But as we move off of Cleveland Avenue, if we're having higher density, we need more employment space in the downtown.
So, I actually think it should be more, and I think we should be clear going out to public now, the second reading.
Okay.
So if I don't think we should go there with 20 with the intention of moving it up. I think we should go there with the intention of getting the
Perfect.
public's feedback on what is being proposed. So
And
I
then,
just don't want it to get
Yeah.
confusing there. I think 20 is too low.
I just wanted to clarify, a lot of these examples that we've shown are for Cleveland, and just to clarify that you are allowed, on other C4 zones in the downtown area will allow for higher FARs.
Yeah.
There won't be an FAR restriction, we will still maintain that height restriction of 6 stories. So 20% of that density will achieve higher employment space in
So
doing.
good.
So I just wanted to just clarify that, that maybe those images aren't relevant for other developments in the downtown area.
can I just comment on that? If you have a higher FAR, it means that your ground floor retail space is going to be larger, so you're still only getting ground floor retail space. If you want to actually include second floor office space, you have to increase the minimum building area of 20% because you can have an entire 6th floor building with 20% employment space and no second floor office. It's,
This
Yeah,
will
I did the
this will get
calculation.
barely more than the 1 story
exactly.
So
at 20%.
through you, Mayor, just to reiterate that we did do a number of community engagements with developers or with, sorry,
Community,
people in the
I
community, and a number of developers were there, is what I meant to say, and they did and what we've seen is a lot of the ground floor is used, a number of the ground floor is used for parking, and so is a lot of the second floor is what we're seeing as well. So what we did hear that 20% was a reasonable amount that would work to make a development viable. So that is what we heard from the community. So this is why we went with that number, and we're proposing that to you today. And that 30% would be the maximum that would be economically feasible for a developer to achieve. So just so that you're aware of that, and that I don't think all of that ground, in the examples that we explored with an architect, we did not see examples where when to meet the 20%, they were able to make all of that 20% on the ground floor because of the parking. So they used some of that ground floor for parking, used the second floor for parking, and offered both second story and ground floor commercial. So we did do some calculations around that.
So sorry, can I follow up, Pam? Just to clarify that. So because of the residential parking in the downtown, because they can't go down so far, they have to use, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carrie.
Mayor Huntsman, through you, this image on the bottom here is the 1365 Victoria, and in its first iteration it had, I believe it was 18% commercial, and that was 3 narrow retail units on the bottom as well as some narrow office space on top with parking.
Can we take the second floor out?
Okay, on this one, it's stipulating 20% minimum. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? I'm opposed. Motion carries. Next up, bylaw number 2578, and this is frontage and upper story setback. Anyone want to move this? Moved by Councillor Race, second by Councillor Elliott. Councillor Race?
Well, this is actually the one that I spoke to the first time.
Might be.
So I'm not going to repeat myself.
Anyone else? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Council can now consider the third reading of the public hearing bylaw number 2582. Is there anyone who would like to move third reading? Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Race. Councillor Elliott, do you want to speak to this?
I'll just say that we've been trying to get this one passed for a while, so I think these amendments will help our community.
Thank you. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, EOC. I'm hoping this is very quick. Do you have a 1-minute version of what we're trying to do?
Yep.
I think I know the answer, so. I think I know where council would like to go on this.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Alexis Craig, and I'm the Emergency Program Coordinator for the District of Squamish. And I'm just here today to get Council to pass a resolution indicating their support to submit the District of Squamish Community Emergency Preparedness Fund Emergency Operations Center Stream grant. So essentially what we're looking to do is apply for a grant for $25,000 to improve emergency communications within our community, and primarily it'll be radio equipment for both the Emergency Operations Center, the primary one, as well as the alternate Emergency Operations Center. And purchases I'm working with the IT department to determine what equipment to purchase, but we're looking at potential hardwire for the radio tower replacement or upgrades to the current EOC radio tower. And a portion of the money will go towards the alternate site as well as the primary site. So if anyone would like to pass the resolution to support this application.
We'll move it first, moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Ray. I think this is great. Call the question, all those in favor? You want to speak to it? Oh, Jesus. Councillor Ray, I'm
I
sorry.
was going to give you my life history about this, but no, well, I do support this. Earlier today, we had a very brief discussion about the tsunami scare last night. And I don't want to get into a long conversation with it, but it seemed appropriate that we're talking about communication materials, because from the very brief comments that I heard this morning in the radio, that might be one of the issues that comes out of the looking at what happened last night. So I'll leave that with you. And the other thing that came out of that was an interview with a woman in Port Alberni who talked about the 20-meter line being a safe place in that particular community, and wondered if we had, based on what might be expected from a major tsunami on the west coast, what might be the danger zone in Squamish, and whether we should be clear about that. And so once again, no answer or discussion tonight, but if you can think about that and maybe come back to that after this sort of distills a little bit and settles down and we get some information out of it, that I'll leave it to you to come back and let us know.
I can answer right now.
If you can, do it.
Okay, actually, tsunami, we have a very low probability of tsunami, and the only way we would have a tsunami in our community would be if we had a crustal earthquake, or if a mountain slid off and went into the ocean. So the ability, what you could do in the greater Victoria or any of those communities where you would say 20 meters in, come in, we really couldn't do, because the only way we would have a tsunami is whether we have a huge earthquake, and that would be kind of almost irrelevant at that point. So it's not one of our, it's one of the few hazards we don't have to worry about.
Other than if for whatever reason, the mountain sloughed off into Howe Sound and created a localized,
Yeah,
increase.
other than that, if the
Yeah.
mountain sloughed off into the Howe Sound and created a localized tsunami, then that could be a concern. But it wouldn't be the same kind of, like, in order to do the research and the science where you can go into a community like Tofino or Port Alberni and have figured out the line of
The
which it would go.
probability needs to be way high.
It's so the probability is just, and what that would look like would vary between the.
You got every other hazard, so
Yeah, yeah. Get it right.
appreciate that. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And thank you very much. And the wastewater treatment plant emergency expenditures update. This came out of the meeting this afternoon. Have you read the motion, everybody? Councillor Race, you can move that motion. Moved by Councillor Race, seconded by Councillor Kent. Any comments? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Motion to terminate, moved by Councillor Race, seconded by Councillor Blackman-Wolf. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.